The cargo ship Horizon's Edge moved through the dark space between stars. It was an old ship, built 20 years ago, but it still worked well. The hull had some dents and scratches from years of travel, but the engines were strong and the life support systems never failed. Captain Jake Morrison had commanded this ship for 5 years, and he knew every sound it made, every shake and rattle in its metal bones. Jake sat in his chair on the bridge, looking at the star map on the big screen in front of him. They were 3 days out from Station Nexus, heading toward a planet called Korathi Prime. The trip would take 3 weeks if nothing went wrong. Jake hoped nothing would go wrong. His first officer, Megan Carter, walked onto the bridge with a tablet in her hand. She was a tall woman with short brown hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She had served with Jake for 3 years, and he trusted her more than anyone else on the ship. "Captain," Megan said, "I have the files on our passengers." Jake turned his chair to face her. "The ambassador and her kids, right? What do we need to know?" Megan pulled up the information on her tablet. Ambassador Velix is a senior diplomat from Korathi Prime, very important in the Galactic Council. She has been at Station Nexus for 6 months, working on trade agreements. Now she is going home with her 3 children. "Children?" Jake raised an eyebrow. "Nobody told me there would be children." "Cubs," Megan corrected him. "The Korathi call their young cubs. There are 3 of them. Tico is the oldest, about 12 in human years. Ren is the middle one, around 10. And Zira is the youngest, maybe 7 or 8. Jake nodded slowly. He had transported alien passengers before. Most of them were quiet and kept to themselves. A diplomat and 3 kids should not be too much trouble. Megan seemed to read his thoughts. "Captain, I should warn you about something. I read the xenobiology reports on Korathi cubs. And they are very curious, very active, very fast." Megan looked at him with serious eyes. "The reports compare them to a mix between cats and monkeys. They climb everything. They explore everything. They get into everything." Jake waved his hand. "We have hosted alien delegations before. How bad can 3 cubs be?" Megan did not answer. She just looked at him with an expression that said she remembered those words. 2 hours later, the shuttle from Station Nexus docked with the Horizon's Edge. Jake went down to the cargo bay to greet his passengers personally. He wore his best uniform, the one with all the buttons polished. First impressions mattered with diplomats. The shuttle door opened, and Ambassador Velix stepped out. She was tall and covered in silver fur that seemed to shine under the lights. Her face was like a cat's, with a small nose and large golden eyes. She wore a long blue robe decorated with symbols that Jake did not recognize. She moved with grace and dignity, like someone who was used to being important. Behind her came the cubs. Jake had seen pictures of Korathi in his files, but pictures did not prepare him for the real thing. The cubs were the size of large dogs, maybe like golden retrievers. But they stood on 2 legs and had hands with 4 fingers each. Their fur was the same silver as their mother's, but it was fluffier, like they had not grown into their adult coats yet. Their eyes were huge, taking up half their faces, and those eyes were looking everywhere at once. The oldest one, Tico, looked around the cargo bay with careful attention. He seemed to be studying everything, taking mental notes. The middle one, Ren, was already moving toward a stack of crates, her nose twitching as she sniffed at them. And the youngest, Zira, had somehow already climbed halfway up a support beam before her mother noticed. "Zira, come down," Ambassador Velix said in a calm but firm voice. The little cub climbed down, but her eyes never stopped moving. She looked at the lights, the walls, the floor, the humans. Everything was interesting to her. Ambassador Velix turned to Jake and bowed her head slightly. "Captain Morrison, I thank you for transporting my family. The Galactic Council speaks highly of human ships and human crews." Jake returned the bow. "Ambassador, we are honored to have you aboard. My crew will do everything to make your journey comfortable." "I am sure you will." Velix looked at her cubs with an expression that Jake recognized. It was the look of a tired parent. "I must apologize in advance for my children. They are young, and young Korathi have much energy. I will do my best to keep them controlled." "I am sure they will be fine," Jake said with a smile. He would remember those words later. Chief Engineer Danny Ortega was in the engine room when he first met the Cubs. Danny was a big man with thick arms and a beard that he kept neatly trimmed. He had worked on ships since he was 18 years old, and there was no machine he could not fix. He was under a console, replacing a power coupling, when he felt something watching him. Danny pulled himself out and looked around. He saw nothing. He went back to work. A minute later, he felt it again. That strange feeling of eyes on his back. Danny looked up. Zira was hanging from a pipe near the ceiling, her golden eyes fixed on him. "Hello," Danny said slowly. "How did you get in here?" Zira did not answer. She just watched him with that unblinking stare. Danny reached for his communicator. "Captain, this is Ortega in engineering. We might have underestimated this situation." Over the next 2 days, the Cubs explored the ship. They moved as a group. Always together, always quiet. They found the mess hall and tasted human food. They found the recreation room and investigated the exercise equipment. They found the medical bay, and Dr. Lisa Park had to chase them away from her supplies 3 times. They found the ventilation system. Zira was the first one inside. She discovered that the vents connected almost every part of the ship, and she could move through them faster than walking in the corridors. Her brother and sister followed her. Soon, crew members reported strange sounds above their heads. Scratching, tapping. The occasional pair of glowing eyes looking down through a vent cover. Ensign Katie Liu was working in the maintenance bay when Ren dropped down from a ceiling vent and landed right next to her. Katie screamed and dropped her tools. Ren looked at her with what might have been an apologetic expression, then scrambled back up into the vent and disappeared. Jake called a meeting of his senior officers. "We need to keep track of those Cubs," he said. "They are getting into places they should not be." "I have tried to follow them on the security cameras," said Lieutenant Nicole Tran, who handled navigation and also monitored the ship's internal sensors. "They are too fast. By the time I see them in one place, they are already somewhere else." "Can we lock them in their quarters?" asked Danny. Jake shook his head. "They are diplomatic guests. We cannot lock them up like prisoners. Their mother would complain to the council, and we would never get another transport contract." Megan leaned forward. "What about giving them something to do? Maybe they are exploring because they are bored." It was a good idea. Jake ordered the recreation room opened for the Cubs at all hours. He had crew members set up games and puzzles. He even asked Dr. Park to give them a tour of the medical bay, thinking that science might interest them. Nothing worked. The Cubs played with the games for a few minutes, then got bored. They listened to Dr. Park's explanations politely, then went back to climbing through the vents. On the 3rd day, Jake found Ambassador Velix on the observation deck, looking out at the stars. "Ambassador," he said, "your children are very active." Velix made a sound that might have been a sigh. "In our culture, we allow Cubs much freedom. It is how they learn. They must touch everything, smell everything, see everything. To keep them confined is considered harmful to their development." "I understand," Jake said, "but my ship has many areas that could be dangerous for curious children." Velix nodded. "I have spoken to them. They promise to stay away from the dangerous places." She paused. "They are good Cubs, Captain. They mean no harm. They are just curious." Jake looked out at the stars. 3 weeks. He had to survive 3 weeks with 3 furry explorers who could fit into spaces he could not reach and move faster than he could follow. How much trouble could they really cause? He was about to find out. On the morning of day 3, Ensign Katie Liu reported for her shift in the maintenance bay on Deck 7. She was 24 years old, with black hair tied back in a ponytail and grease stains on her uniform that never seemed to wash out completely. Katie's job was not glamorous. She managed supplies, kept inventory, and made sure the less important parts of the ship kept working. Deck 7 was the lowest deck that held living spaces. Below it were cargo holds and storage areas. Above it were the crew quarters, the bridge, and all the places where important things happened. Most crew members forgot Deck 7 existed until something broke. Katie liked it that way. She could work in peace, listen to music, and not worry about officers looking over her shoulder. Her shift partner was Ben Castillo, a skinny man with glasses and a nervous habit of tapping his fingers on things. Ben was good with computers and terrible with people. He and Katie worked well together because neither of them talked much. Katie was in the chemical storage locker when her communicator beeped. "Katie, I need help up here," Ben's voice said. "Coolant leak on deck 6. It is not big, but I cannot handle it alone." Katie looked at the locker. She had been reorganizing the shelves, moving containers from one place to another. The job was half done. Bottles of cleaning solution sat on the floor. Cans of lubricant were stacked on a cart. A large drum of industrial floor polish stood in the corner, its lid loose because Katie had been checking the expiration date. She should close the locker. She knew she should close it, but the leak sounded urgent and Ben sounded worried. "I will be right there," Katie said. 10 minutes. She left the locker door open and hurried to the turbo lift. The Cubs found the locker in 8 minutes. Tico was the leader of their little group, even though he was not the biggest or the strongest. He was the smartest, and his brother and sister followed his ideas. That morning, Tico had decided they should explore Deck 7. They had already seen the other decks. Deck 7 was the last unknown place on the ship. The three Cubs moved through the corridors in silence. Their paws made no sound on the metal floor. Their silver fur blended into the gray walls. They had learned to avoid the security cameras by watching the little red lights and staying out of their view. Ren smelled the locker first. Her nose was the best of the three, and she caught the scent of interesting chemicals from 20 meters away. "This way," she whispered to her siblings. They found the open door and slipped inside. The locker was full of wonderful things. Bottles with colorful liquids. Cans that made interesting sounds when you shook them. Strange tools that Tico had never seen before. Zira wandered to the back of the locker. She was always the one who went the farthest, looked the deepest, found the most hidden things. That was how she found the drum of floor polish. It was a big container, almost as tall as she was. The lid was not on tight. Zira pushed it with her paw and it moved. She pushed harder, and it fell off completely. Inside was a thick liquid that smelled sharp and clean. Zira dipped her paw into it. The liquid was slippery, like oil but thicker. It felt strange between her fingers. "Tico, Ren, come look," she called softly. Her siblings came over. Tico studied the container with careful eyes. He could read some human words, and he saw the label said, "Industrial Floor Polish, creates high-shine protective coating." "What is floor polish?" Ren asked. "Humans put it on floors to make them shiny," Tico explained. He had read about human cleaning customs in the ship's database. It makes the surface smooth and bright. Zira was still playing with the liquid on her paw. She wiped it on the floor, and a streak of shine appeared on the dull metal. "It does make things shiny," Zira said. She stepped onto the streak. Her paws slipped. Zira fell forward, her legs going in different directions. She slid across the floor, spinning in a slow circle, and hit the far wall with a soft thump. For a moment, there was silence. Then Zira made a sound. It was high and chirping, and it took her siblings a moment to understand what it was. Zira was laughing. "That was amazing," she said, her golden eyes wide with joy. "I went so fast I could not stop. It was like flying but on the ground." Tico and Ren looked at each other. Then they looked at the drum of floor polish. Then they looked at the streak of shine on the floor. Ren moved first. She dipped both her paws in the polish and spread it on the floor in a wide circle. Then she ran and jumped into the circle. She slid even faster than Zira had. She spun twice, bounced off a shelf, and crashed into a pile of cleaning rags. She came up laughing, her fur covered in white fluff. Tico was the careful one. He analyzed the situation. The floor polish made surfaces slippery. Slippery surfaces meant fast sliding. Fast sliding meant fun. He could not argue with the logic. "We need more space," he said. The Cubs worked together. They tipped the drum onto its side and let the polish pour out onto the maintenance bay floor. There was a lot of polish in that drum. It spread in a thick, gleaming wave, covering everything. Zira went first. She took a running start and leaped onto the polish. She slid across the entire bay, her arms out for balance, her tail straight behind her. She hit the far wall and bounced off, still sliding, spinning, laughing. Ren followed, then Tico. The three cubs took turns, racing across the bay, crashing into walls, tumbling over each other. They discovered that if they rolled in the polish, their fur became slippery too. They could slide on their bellies like sea creatures on ice, but the bay was too small. They kept hitting walls. They kept bumping into shelves. Zira looked at the door that led to the corridor. What if we made the hallway slippery too? It was a dangerous idea. It was a bad idea. Tico knew this. He was the responsible one. But the sliding was so much fun. We would need more polish, he said. Ren had already found another container on the shelf. This one was not as big as the first, but there was more on the cart that Katie had left out. Cans and bottles of cleaning supplies, some of which looked equally slippery. The cubs gathered their supplies and got to work. In 1 hour, the maintenance bay and the corridor outside were completely coated in floor polish. The cubs did not use brushes or mops. They used themselves. They rolled in the polish until their fur was soaked. Then they ran through the corridors, spreading the slippery coating everywhere they went. They discovered the best technique was to pour polish on the floor, then slide through it to spread it evenly. They covered the junction where 3 corridors met. They covered the area in front of the turbo lift. They covered the path to the cargo hold. Deck 7 became a slip zone. Crewman Chris Delgado was the first human to discover the problem. He was a young man who worked in cargo storage, and he had been sent to Deck 7 to retrieve some parts. He stepped out of the turbo lift, took 3 steps, and suddenly his feet were not under him anymore. Chris hit the floor hard. The impact knocked the breath out of him. He tried to get up, but his hands slipped. He tried to roll over, but his body kept sliding. He ended up on his back, moving slowly down the corridor like a turtle on ice. "What is happening?" Chris said to the empty hallway. He heard a sound, chirping, laughing. 3 pairs of golden eyes watched him from around a corner. Chris finally managed to grab a pipe on the wall and pull himself up. He stood very carefully, his legs shaking, his feet sliding with every tiny movement. "This is Delgado," he said into his communicator. "I am on Deck 7. Something is very wrong with the floors." On the bridge, Captain Jake Morrison received the call. "Delgado, what do you mean wrong?" "They are slippery, sir. Very slippery. I can barely stand." Jake frowned. Floors did not become slippery on their own. He turned to Megan Carter. "Get a team down to Deck 7. Find out what is going on." Megan nodded and left the bridge. Down on Deck 7, Chris Delgado tried to walk toward the turbo lift. Each step was a battle. His feet kept sliding out from under him. He grabbed walls, pipes, anything he could reach. He made it 5 meters in 10 minutes. Behind him, the cubs watched with fascination. They had never seen a creature struggle so much with simple movement. The humans were strange. They had no fur on their paws. They could not balance on slippery surfaces. They fell down so easily. Zira felt a tiny bit of guilt. The human looked scared and confused. But then Chris slipped again and slid in a spinning circle, his arms waving wildly, and he looked so funny that Zira forgot her guilt and started laughing again. The cubs had discovered something amazing. They had found a new way to play, and they were not ready to stop. Not even close. The news spread through the ship like fire. Deck 7 was dangerous. The floors were slippery. People were falling. Megan Carter took a team of 3 crew members down to investigate. She was a careful person who planned for problems before they happened. She brought emergency supplies, medical kits, and safety ropes. She did not bring the right shoes. The turbo lift doors opened on Deck 7. Megan took 1 step out and immediately knew something was very wrong. The floor under her boot felt different. Slick. Smooth. She looked down and saw that the metal surface was shining like glass. "Everyone stay in the turbo lift," she ordered. But it was too late. Crewman Tom Hardy had already stepped out. His foot slid forward. His body went backward. He hit the floor with a loud smack and began sliding down the corridor. "Help!" Tom called, his voice getting farther away. "I cannot stop." Megan grabbed the turbo lift door frame with both hands. "What is on these floors?" She could smell it now. A sharp, chemical smell. Floor polish. Someone had covered the deck in floor polish. Behind her, the other two crew members were holding onto the walls inside the turbolift. Their eyes were wide. "Lieutenant," one of them said, "what do we do?" Megan thought fast. They needed to get to Tom, who had slid around a corner and was no longer visible. They needed to find out how far the slippery area extended. They needed to figure out who did this and why. "Stay here," she said. "Call the captain. Tell him we have a serious situation." She let go of the door frame. The slide was surprisingly fast. Megan tried to stay on her feet, but her boots had smooth soles designed for ship corridors, not ice rinks. She fell onto her side and glided down the hallway, spinning slowly as she went. The ceiling passed by above her. The lights made streaks of white. The walls were a gray blur. It would have been almost peaceful if she had not been completely out of control. She hit Tom Hardy at the junction of 3 corridors. They tangled together, arms and legs mixing up, and slid in a new direction. "Sorry, Lieutenant," Tom said. "Not your fault." Megan tried to grab something, anything, but there was nothing to hold. The walls were too smooth. The floor was too slick. She could not even sit up without sliding somewhere else. On the bridge, Captain Jake Morrison listened to the report with growing concern. "Floor polish," he repeated. "The entire deck is covered in floor polish?" "Yes, sir," said the crewman on the communicator. "Lieutenant Carter and crewman Hardy are stuck in the junction. They cannot get up. They cannot walk." Jake closed his eyes for a moment. He knew who was responsible. He did not need to check the security cameras. "Where are the Karathi cubs?" he asked. "Unknown, sir. They are not appearing on any cameras." Of course they were not. The little creatures had figured out where the cameras were and how to avoid them. Jake had to admire their intelligence even as he wanted to scream in frustration. "Seal off Deck 7, he ordered. "No one goes down there until we figure out how to deal with this." But sealing off Deck 7 was not so easy. Several crew members were already trapped there. Navigation Officer Nicole Tran had gone down to check on a sensor array and was now stuck in a corridor near the cargo hold. Crewman Chris Delgado was still trying to reach the turbolift, and Katie Liu had returned from fixing the coolant leak to find her maintenance bay transformed into a skating rink. Katie stood at the entrance to her bay, her mouth open in shock. Everything was covered in shine. The floor, the walls near the bottom, even some of the equipment. The drum of floor polish lay empty on its side, surrounded by a lake of gleaming liquid. "My locker," Katie whispered. "They got into my locker." She tried to step inside. Her foot slipped. She grabbed the door frame and held on. "This is Liu," she said into her communicator. "I found the source. Someone emptied an entire drum of industrial polish in the maintenance bay. It has spread everywhere." In the corridor behind her, she heard a sound. Sliding. Then laughing. Katie turned and saw the cubs go past. They were on their bellies, sliding like sleds, pushing off the walls to change direction. Zero was in the lead, her golden eyes bright with joy. Ren was close behind, her fur covered in shiny polish. Tico brought up the rear, steering himself with his tail. They zoomed past Katie without stopping. They turned a corner and disappeared. "I also found who did it," Katie added to her report. "The cubs." The situation grew worse over the next hour. The polish was spreading. Every time someone tried to walk on Deck 7, they fell. Every time they fell, they slid. Every time they slid, they spread the polish farther. Lieutenant Sam Brennan tried a different approach. He got down on his hands and knees and crawled. It worked for about 10 meters. Then his hand slipped, and he fell face first onto the floor. He slid backward down a slight slope he had not even noticed and ended up in the turbo lift, which had been left open. Dr. Lisa Park came down with her medical kit to help anyone who was injured. She made it 3 steps before she fell. Her medical kit flew open, and supplies scattered across the slick floor, sliding in every direction. Bandages rolled away. Bottles of medicine spun like tops. Dr. Park tried to catch them and fell again. Danny Ortega, the chief engineer, had an idea. He would use the magnetic boots that crew members wore during spacewalks. The boots stuck to metal surfaces using powerful magnets. They should work on the polished floor. He put on the boots and stepped onto deck 7. The boots stuck to the floor. Danny smiled in triumph. Then he tried to walk. The boots stuck too well. Every step required enormous effort to lift his foot. He could only move a few centimeters at a time. And when he tried to take a bigger step, the boot released suddenly, and he fell sideways. Danny ended up on his back, his magnetic boots stuck to the floor, unable to get up. "This is not working," he said into his communicator. The cubs watched everything from their hiding spots. They had found places in the ventilation system where they could see the corridors below. They watched the humans struggle and fall. They watched them try different ideas and fail. Zira felt that small guilt again. The humans looked unhappy. Some of them looked hurt. One of them was bleeding from a cut on his forehead where he had hit a corner. "Maybe we should stop," Zira said to her siblings. Tico looked at her. "Stop what?" "The sliding, the polish. Maybe we made a mistake." Ren shook her head. "The sliding is fun. It is the most fun we have had since we left home." "But the humans are not having fun," Zira pointed out. Tico thought about this. He was the smart one, and he liked to think about problems carefully. The humans were definitely not having fun. They were falling and sliding and making sounds of frustration, but that was because they did not know how to slide properly. The cubs had learned quickly. They had figured out how to balance, how to steer, how to use the slippery floor to go fast without losing control. "They just need to learn," Tico said. "Once they learn how to slide, they will have fun too." Zira was not sure about this. The humans seemed very bad at sliding. They did not have the right kind of feet. They did not have tails for balance. They fell in strange ways and could not get up. But Tico was usually right about things. He was the smart one. Down below, Captain Jake Morrison had arrived on Deck 7. He stood in the turbo lift, looking at the gleaming corridor ahead. He had not stepped out. He had seen what happened to everyone else who stepped out. "Options," he said to the officers gathered behind him. "I need options." "We could flood the deck with water," Danny suggested from where he lay stuck on the floor. "Wash away the polish." "That would damage the electrical systems," Megan pointed out. She had managed to grab a support beam and was holding herself in place. "We would lose power to half the ship." "What about sand?" Nicole asked. She was sitting against a wall, her legs straight out in front of her, unable to stand. "Sand would give us traction." "Where would we get sand?" Jake asked. "We are on a spaceship." No one had an answer. Jake looked at the shining floor. He looked at his crew, scattered across the deck like bowling pins after a strike. He looked at the turbo lift doors, his only safe place. Somewhere in the distance he heard laughing, high and chirping. The cubs. Jake had a sudden, terrible thought. The cubs were not done. They had been busy for an hour, spreading polish everywhere they went. They had explored the entire deck. They knew every corner, every junction, every corridor, and they had not come near the turbo lift yet. "Everyone," Jake said slowly. "I think we need to—" He never finished his sentence. 3 small, furry shapes appeared at the end of the corridor. They were moving fast, sliding on their bellies, leaving trails of polish behind them. They were heading straight for the turbo lift. "Close the doors," Jake shouted. "Close the doors now." But the doors were slow. The cubs were fast. Zira reached the turbo lift first. She slid right between Jake's legs and crashed into the back wall. Ren followed, spinning like a top, knocking into 2 crew members. Tico came last, somehow managing to stop himself by grabbing Jake's ankle. The turbo lift doors closed. Jake looked down at the cubs. They looked up at him with wide, innocent golden eyes. "Hello, Captain," Tico said politely. "We have been having a very good day." Jake did not know whether to laugh or cry. The doors opened on Deck 6. The cubs bolted out before anyone could grab them. They left wet, shiny paw prints on the corridor floor. The slip zone was spreading to Deck 6 now, and the cubs showed no signs of stopping. Ambassador Velix found Captain Jake Morrison in the corridor outside the turbo lift on Deck 6. He was staring at the wet, shiny paw prints on the floor with an expression she could not quite read. It might have been anger. It might have been exhaustion. It might have been something else entirely. Captain Morrison, she said, bowing her head deeply. I have heard what my children have done. I am deeply ashamed. Jake looked at her. His uniform was wrinkled. His hair was messy. There was a streak of floor polish on his sleeve from where Tico had grabbed him. Ambassador, he said carefully, I need to know something. Will they stop? Velix hesitated. She knew her children. She knew how they got when they found something exciting. The time Tico had discovered the water recycling system on their home station and had flooded 3 levels trying to make a fountain. The time Ren had taken apart a diplomatic shuttle's navigation computer because she wanted to see how it worked. The time Zira had released 40 small animals from a research lab because she felt sorry for them. They will stop, Velix said slowly. Eventually. Eventually is not good enough. Jake ran a hand through his hair. We have crew trapped on Deck 7. We have polish spreading to Deck 6, and I have no idea where the cubs are now or what they are planning next. Velix's ears flattened against her head. This was a posture of shame in her culture. I will find them. I will speak to them. They will listen to their mother. Jake was not sure about that. He had seen those golden eyes, full of joy and mischief. Those cubs were having the time of their lives. They were not going to stop just because their mother asked nicely. But he nodded anyway. Thank you, Ambassador. Any help would be appreciated. Velix left to search for her children. Jake went to the bridge to think. In the recreation room on Deck 4, Megan Carter was also thinking. She had finally escaped from Deck 7 by grabbing onto a crewman who was being pulled out by rope. Now she sat on a bench, her uniform covered in polish, her dignity in ruins. But her mind was working. The problem was simple. Smooth surfaces plus smooth shoes equals falling. The solution had to address one of those factors. They could not change the surfaces quickly, the polish would take hours to clean up, and the cubs kept making new messes, so they had to change the shoes. Megan stood up and walked to the storage closet in the recreation room. This was where the crew kept equipment for games and exercise. Balls, nets, weights, mats, and clothes. She found what she was looking for on a shelf in the corner. Socks. Thick, woolly socks that crew members wore during cold weather or when they wanted to be comfortable. The fabric was rough and textured, nothing like the smooth soles of their boots. Megan picked up a pair and thought about physics. The polish made surfaces slippery by creating a thin layer that reduced friction. Smooth materials slid easily on smooth materials. But rough materials, materials with texture, could grip better. The fibers in wool would catch on the floor, providing tiny points of contact that would resist sliding. Maybe. There was only one way to find out. Megan took off her boots and put on the socks. She walked carefully to the door, stepped out into the corridor, and made her way to the turbo lift. The doors opened on Deck 6. There was polish here now, tracked by the cubs and by crew members who had not known to avoid it. The floor was shining and wet. Megan took a deep breath and stepped out. She did not fall. Her socked feet gripped the floor. Not perfectly, but enough. She could feel herself sliding a little with each step, but it was controlled. She could balance. She could walk. It works, she whispered. She walked faster. The socks held. She could actually move across the polished floor without falling. It was not normal walking. It was more like skating, each step a controlled slide. But it was movement. It was progress. Megan reached for her communicator with a smile. 15 minutes later, half the crew on the horizon's edge was wearing thick socks over their boots. The ship's storage had plenty of them, and crew members who had their own comfortable socks contributed those too. Katie Lou even found a box of fuzzy slippers in a cargo container, left over from a previous shipment, and those worked almost as well. The change was remarkable. People who had been stuck on decks 6 and 7 were now moving. Slowly, carefully, but moving. They slid down corridors with their arms out for balance. They pushed off walls to change direction. They caught each other when someone started to fall. Katie Lou discovered something even better. She found a mop handle in her ruined maintenance bay and used it like a pole. By pushing against the floor, she could propel herself forward in a smooth glide. She looked like a gondolier in one of those old Earth cities with water streets. This is actually kind of fun, she said as she sailed past Ben Castillo, who was slowly making his way to the cargo hold. Ben stared at her. Then he found his own pole and tried the same thing. Soon, crew members were racing each other down the corridors. They discovered that if you took a running start on a normal floor and then jumped onto the polished section, you could slide incredible distances. Lieutenant Sam Brennan made it from the turbolift to the cargo hold in one push, covering almost 80 meters. The Cubs watched this from their hiding spots in the ventilation system. Their golden eyes were wide with surprise. They are not falling anymore, Wren observed. They changed their feet, Tico said. He could see the fuzzy coverings on the humans' boots. They put something on their feet to make them grip better. That is clever, Zira said with admiration. We did not think of that. The humans were not just walking now. They were playing. Zira could see them laughing, pushing each other, sliding in groups. They had taken the slippery floors and turned them into a game, just like the Cubs had done. They are like us, Zira said softly. Tico tilted his head, considering this. What do you mean? They are having fun. We made a mess, and they are having fun with it. We did not expect that. Wren made a thoughtful sound. The report said humans were serious creatures. That they worked hard and did not play much. The reports were wrong. The three Cubs looked at each other. Something had changed. They had expected the humans to be angry. They had expected punishment, confinement, stern words from the captain. Instead, the humans had adapted. They had found a way to enjoy the chaos. This was interesting. This was very interesting. Zira made a decision. She crawled through the vent toward an opening above the main corridor on Deck 6. Below her, she could see Katie Lou sailing past on her mop handle pole, a big smile on her face. I want to play with them, Zira said. Mother said we should stay hidden, Tico reminded her. Mother is wrong. Look at them, Tico. They want to play too. Before her siblings could stop her, Zira dropped through the vent opening and landed in front of Katie Lou. Katie gasped and stopped herself by grabbing a wall handle. She stared at the little cub who had just appeared from the ceiling. Zira looked up at her with uncertain eyes. She had caused so much trouble. She had made such a mess. The human probably hated her. I am sorry, Zira said, in careful, slow comment. We did not mean to cause problems. We just wanted to slide. Katie looked at the cub. She looked at the shining floor. She looked at her socked feet and her mop handle pole. Then she laughed. Kid, she said, you accidentally invented the best entertainment this crew has had in months. Zira blinked. You are not angry. I was angry an hour ago. Now I am impressed. Katie reached into her pocket and pulled out something. It was a pair of socks, smaller than the ones she was wearing. Someone found these in the children's supplies. They were meant for human kids, but they might fit you. Zira took the socks with careful pause. She looked at them, then at Katie, then at the socks again. You want me to play with you? She asked. Katie smiled. I want to see if you can beat my time from the cargo hold to the maintenance bay. Right now the record is 23 seconds. A slow grin spread across Zira's furry face. She pulled the socks onto her paws, struggling a little with the shape but managing to get them on. They felt strange but good, grippy. She stood up carefully on her sock-covered paws. The floor was still slippery, but now she could control her movement better. She could start and stop when she wanted to. Where do I start? Zira asked. 10 minutes later, the race was official. Zira, wearing her modified socks, versus Katie with her mop pole, sliding from the cargo hold to the maintenance bay. Crew members lined the corridor to watch. Bets were made. Someone found a whistle. Captain Jake Morrison arrived just in time to see his crew cheering as a small alien cub and a young ensign raced down a polished corridor at dangerous speeds. He stood there for a long moment, watching. His ship was a mess. His schedules were ruined. His Deck 7 was still a slip zone that would take hours to clean. And his crew was laughing, playing, having fun. Ambassador Velix appeared beside him. She had come looking for her children and had found them in the middle of a celebration. I do not understand your species, she said quietly. Any other crew would have punished my children, would have complained to the council, would have demanded payments for damages. Your people turned disaster into a party. Jake watched Zira cross the finish line, arms raised in victory, her golden eyes bright with pure joy. He watched his crew clap and cheer for the little cub who had caused all this trouble. He thought about how humans had survived for thousands of years. Ice ages, plagues, wars, famines, space travel. They had survived because they adapted. They found ways to make hard things bearable. They found joy in unexpected places. Ambassador, Jake said with a small smile, it is kind of what we do. The official record for the Deck 7 slide from the cargo hold to the maintenance bay was set by crewman Chris Delgado at 11.3 seconds. It was a time that seemed impossible to beat. Chris had taken a running start from the cargo hold doors, launched himself onto the polished floor, and slid the entire 87 meters without touching a wall or losing balance. The Cubs tried to beat him. Zira came close with 12.1 seconds, but her smaller size meant she could not build as much speed. Tico managed 12.8 seconds by using his tail as a rudder. Ren did not care about the time and just liked spinning in circles. By the evening of that day, Deck 7 had become the most popular place on the ship. Word spread that the floors were incredible for sliding. Off-duty crew members came down to try it for themselves. Someone brought music and connected it to the ship's speaker system. Someone else brought snacks from the mess hall. Danny Ortega rigged up a timing system using sensors from his engineering supplies. He placed markers at the start and finish lines and created a display that showed split times and final times. He also created a leaderboard that hung on the wall near the turbolift. Megan Carter organized the races. She created categories for different types of sliding. There was the straight slide, where you went from point A to point B as fast as possible. There was the style slide, where judges scored you on creativity and elegance. There was the team slide, where groups of 3 had to stay connected while crossing the finish line. Lieutenant Nicole Tran discovered a section of Deck 7 where 3 corridors met at a slight angle. This created a natural ramp effect. If you hit it at the right speed and angle, you could get airborne for a fraction of a second before landing and continuing your slide. She called it the jump zone, and it quickly became the most popular spot on the deck. Dr. Lisa Park set up a small station near the turbolift to treat minor injuries. There were some falls and bumps, but nothing serious. The socks and slippers provided enough grip to prevent the bad accidents that had happened earlier. Captain Jake Morrison stood at the edge of the celebration, watching his crew play. He should have been upset. He should have been thinking about schedules and duties and the proper running of a starship. Instead, he felt something he had not felt in a long time: pride. His crew had been given a problem. They had solved it. Not by complaining or blaming or giving up, but by adapting. By finding a way to make the best of a bad situation. By turning chaos into fun. That was humanity. That was what made humans special among all the species in the galaxy. Ambassador Velix came to stand beside him. Her 3 cubs were on the deck below, sliding and laughing with the human crew. Zira was teaching a young ensign how to spin without getting dizzy. Tico was having a serious conversation with Danny about the physics of friction and momentum. Ren was simply enjoying herself, sliding back and forth with a huge grin on her furry face. "I will report this to the council," Velix said. Jake tensed. A report to the Galactic Council could mean trouble. His ship might lose contracts. His crew might face penalties. He might lose his command. "I will report," Velix continued, "that humans are remarkable. That they took a disaster caused by my children and transformed it into something wonderful. That they showed kindness and creativity in the face of chaos." She looked at him with those golden eyes. "I will recommend that more Karathi families travel on human ships." Jake blinked. "Really? My children have never been happier. Look at them, Captain. They are playing with your crew like they have known them for years. On most ships, on most stations, other species treat our cubs as problems to be managed. Your people treat them as friends." Jake looked at the scene below. Chris Delgado was showing Zira how to push off the wall at an angle for better speed. Katie Liu was having a sliding race with Ren. Ben Castillo was explaining the leaderboard to Tico, who was listening with intense fascination. "They are good kids," Jake said. "They just have a lot of energy." Too much energy, some would say. Too much curiosity. Too much trouble. Velix made a sound that might have been a laugh. "But your humans do not seem to mind." The celebration continued until late in the ship's night cycle. Eventually, the music stopped, the snacks ran out, and tired crew members made their way back to their quarters. The leaderboard was complete, with Chris Delgado's record at the top and dozens of names below it. The Cubs were exhausted. Zira fell asleep on a pile of cleaning rags in the maintenance bay, her fur still slightly shiny from polish residue. Ren curled up near the turbolift, too tired to move. Tico stayed awake long enough to thank Danny for the timing system before his eyes closed. Ambassador Velix carried her children to their quarters one by one. They barely stirred as she tucked them into their beds. The cleanup started the next morning. It took 12 hours to scrub all the polish off the floors. Crew members worked in shifts, using special solvents and lots of elbow grease. The Cubs tried to help, but they mostly got in the way, so Velix took them to the observation deck to watch the stars instead. But something remained after the polish was gone. The marks on the walls where sliding crew members had grabbed for support. The scuff lines on the floor where socks had gripped and released. The timer that Danny left set up in the cargo area, just in case anyone wanted to race again. And the stories. The crew of the Horizon's Edge told stories about that day for years afterward. They told other crews at stations and ports across the galaxy. They told their families when they called home. They told new crew members who joined the ship. The story grew with each telling. Some versions had the Cubs covering 5 decks instead of 2. Some versions had crew members reaching impossible speeds. Some versions included dramatic rescues and heroic slides. But all versions ended the same way, with humans finding joy in disaster, with laughter overcoming chaos, with connection instead of conflict. The Cubs grew up. 20 years passed. Zira became a diplomat like her mother, representing Karathi Prime on the Galactic Council. She was known for her wisdom, her patience, and her unusual fondness for human culture. When young diplomats asked her about humans, she would tell them the story of the Horizon's Edge. "They are not like other species," she would say. "When they face problems, they do not just solve them, they transform them. They find the fun hidden inside the frustration, the opportunity inside the obstacle." "Is that really true?" the young diplomats would ask. "It sounds like exaggeration." Zira would smile, remembering the feeling of sliding across that polished deck, surrounded by laughing humans who had every reason to be angry but chose to play instead. "I was there," she would say. "I saw it myself. My siblings and I caused a disaster on their ship, and they turned it into a celebration. They put socks on their feet and learned to slide. They made a game out of our mess." What happened to them? The crew of that ship? They are still flying. The captain retired a few years ago, but some of the crew are still there. I visit when I can. They always remember me. She would pause. They still have the leaderboard. My name is on it. 12th place for the fastest slide. The young diplomats would shake their heads in wonder. Every species had heard stories about humans. Stories about their endurance, their creativity, their strange ability to survive anything. But this story was different. This story was about joy. What is the lesson? They would ask. What should we learn from this? Zira would think about the question. She had thought about it many times over the years. What made humans special was not their strength or their intelligence or their technology. Other species had those things too. What made humans special was their attitude. The lesson, Zira would say, is that chaos is not always bad. Problems are not always problems. Sometimes if you change your perspective, if you adapt instead of resist, you find something wonderful hiding inside the disaster. She would look out at the stars, remembering that old cargo ship and its remarkable crew. Humans do not just survive chaos, she would say. They dance with it, they laugh with it, they put on socks and slide right through it. And across the galaxy, the legend of the Great Deck 7 Slip Zone lived on. It became one of many stories about humans, passed from species to species, station to station, world to world. A small story about floor polish and fuzzy socks. A big story about what it means to be human. Captain Jake Morrison heard about the legend years later when he was old and retired on a quiet planet far from the shipping lanes. A young Karathi diplomat visited him, introduced herself as Zira's student, and told him that his story was famous across the council. Jake laughed. He remembered that day, the sliding and the spinning, the chaos and the celebration. He remembered the golden eyes of 3 curious cubs in the shining floor of Deck 7. "Famous, huh?" he said. "All because we put on some socks?" "All because you chose to play," the diplomat said. "All because you found joy when others would have found only anger." Jake thought about this. It had not felt like a choice at the time. It had just felt like what humans did. You faced a problem, you solved it, you made the best of things. That was survival. That was life. But maybe that was the point. Maybe what felt normal to humans felt extraordinary to everyone else. Maybe their greatest gift to the galaxy was not their ships or their technology, but their attitude, their willingness to slide through whatever life threw at them. "Tell Zira I said hello," Jake said, "and tell her the record still stands. 11.3 seconds. No one has beaten it yet." The diplomat smiled. "She will be pleased to hear that." "And tell her," Jake added, "that the maintenance bay door is always open. If she ever wants to come back and try to beat that record, she's welcome anytime." Somewhere across the galaxy, Zira received this message. She was in the middle of an important diplomatic meeting, but she took a moment to read it. She smiled. And for just a moment, she remembered the feeling of sliding across a polished deck, surrounded by laughing humans, feeling perfectly, completely alive. Some lessons, she thought, you never forget. Some stories live forever. And some floor polish changes everything.